So,
Good. We're live. Good morning, everybody, if you're based in the US. Good afternoon, if you are where I am, which is in the UK, for episode 3 of HR Breakfast USA. Callie, what have we called this episode?
data everywhere without a drop of insight.
Yep, data everywhere. This is why have we picked a word that we both pronounce very, very differently?
That's the fun part of the fun.
So as you might notice, Sam is not with us today. I can't remember. She did tell us where she was, and I can't remember where she is.
She's presenting. She's speaking right now too.
She's speaking, just not to us or you, our dear listener, at home or at work, which is hopefully where you are kind of coexisting on this Monday morning. So we're going to talk about data or data. That is the last time I will try and make that joke. And not a drop of insight. Data everywhere, not a drop of insight. And we're kind of just looking at data and I suppose where we get started and what Callie and I did in preparation for today's episode is we wrote 3 questions each that neither of us have seen, and we're going to ask each other the questions, and we, as Sam does with us, throw us the questions our way and see if we can answer them in a coherent way. So do you mind if I start, Callie?
Absolutely. I'm trying to make sure we're connected, so please start talking.
Okay, so my first question, because it seems pertinent to start with this one, is when you think about data and HR, where do you even start? Because I've worked with clients kind of on both ends of the spectrum, or that side of the spectrum where we haven't done anything and we've got at best a spreadsheet to manage all our employee data, to right on the other end, it's like, oh, we've got an employee insights team. Here they are. They sit with our customer insight team and everywhere in between. So where would one start in kind of looking at data and an HR team?
I hate that I'm starting here, but I think the standard HR metrics, like you have to at least be familiar with them and be able to start getting curious. So standard meaning things like time to hire, turnover rate. I hate turnover rate. It's my least favorite, but until you start getting more interesting, I think it's a good place to start. You have to have some general understanding of what your people are happy about, what they're unhappy about. So I think those sort of very, very basic, like kindergarten stats, are where everyone can start to see where they should start to get curious. I think we often stop at those, at least in smaller HR teams, where we think that that's kind of the end all be all, is like, okay, our turnover rate got better or our employee engagement got better. I've done my job. I can stop paying attention to the data because it scares me. But really, that should just be scratching the surface to start to see where do we start to dig in further to really understand what's happening. What do you think?
I agree with you. Loath to start with it, but it's like it's data metrics 101 in HR. Is you got to do at least the thing everybody else is probably doing before you start doing anything else. And I like that you put employee engagement in quotation marks. If you want to see our episode on employee engagement, check out episode 2 of HR Breakfast USA, because that's what we talked about and we really deep dove into that, or dove deep into that. It doesn't sound like the phrase though, does it? So where do I stand? I agree with you. I think the other thing is that most people and most companies I've worked inside and for tend to get quite scared quite easily.
Yeah.
And it's not actually that scary, which is why it can just be a spreadsheet, right? Like that's still data, and everything you said can be measured and evaluated in a spreadsheet, but at least you've started. I think the thing that I've seen is that fear drives people into just not starting at all and kind of go, it's so scary and it's such a big thing to get right or wrong that I can't even begin. Like you kind of decision paralysis almost. So yeah. I think the best place to start is just by at least taking that first leap of faith and starting. And then the second step to starting in Toby's patented two-step to starting with data in HR is just get to know where all the data sits in your organization, who looks after it. because more often than not, when I've worked on data projects within HR, that data doesn't just exist in one nice, tidy little place where it's like, oh, here's all my employee data. Num, 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 num. That's nice. It's like, no, you got to go hunting for your food and go and find it. And it isn't just in HR, right? It's in IT, it's in operations, it's in finance, it's in maybe if you're, have a large disparate frontline workforce, it's in like individual regions and stores or locations. And it's like, what you're going to have to do on that kind of road is get to understand where all this data sits and who looks after it. Because at some point, you're probably going to have to ask, please, may I have some of the data? Which is always an interesting conversation, because the first question someone will respond is, why?
Uh-huh.
Like my 3-year-old. So yeah, I think that's my tip.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I think it's so important. I kept thinking, like, if I develop my own platform, I'm going to put that num 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 in it. Like, that's the noise it makes while it's generating the data, because it would be a very satisfying way to do it. One of the questions that I had for you was just, I think even backing up further before we've gotten the data, why do you think that it's so overwhelming that we get into this kind of paralysis state? Because I think that that's a good point for just unpacking how we start to get to that next level, or how we start to learn how to ask for data in a way that doesn't make people want to hide it even further.
So I'm going to go back to a project I worked on probably 2 years ago. And we were looking at all the different platforms. That's all we looked at first, is like, what tech platforms inside the organization are going to give us data? And we got into double digits quite quickly, as you can imagine. It's a large organization. And then it was like, okay, out of all those platforms, what kind of data would we expect to get out of those platforms that might be pertinent to the project we're on? And quite quickly, we ended up with 200 possible lines of data from 10 to 12 different platforms. Now, when you do that, that is scary. It's like, imagine trying to go find 200 lines of data that just like floating around your organization somewhere and trying to bring it all into one place. An unenviable task. But then the next step is definitely do that, because it is worthwhile, because it's great to be cognizant of the stuff that is floating around an organization. But the next step is like prioritize. And on that project, we just said these 5. If we create some hypotheses with these 5 lines of data, and if we can go and get these, we're going to be able to demonstrate if there's any kind of impact of the employee experience kind of design that we come up with. So it's like, get yourself to that scary place where it's too much, and then prioritize and make it not as much, knowing that you can always go back to that list of 200 if you want, and it would be really, really great. But by the time you get to that point, I think you're my business partner hates this phrase, but you kind of get into the ends of looking at a data lake for your HR team, which kind of important to bring all that data into one place, into a manageable format. But if you're going to start, just start small and don't get overwhelmed by the potential that data has in your organization, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like we end up chasing after the wrong thing, or very quickly kind of claiming our stake, putting the flag in, saying, okay, we've found something, now we're going to anchor around it, rather than taking the time to try to see what other data points can we look at to make sure we're on the right track, and not just, caught up in a red herring, really. But that's one of my favorite things to talk about with data in general, or HR data, is it's not enough just to think that you're on the right track. You have to intentionally try to derail it, so that you have that opportunity to confirm, okay, this is something we really should be getting excited about. We're on the right track. Let's dig deeper with our employees directly.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you kind of a follow-up question to your question, so in this situation, we've looked at the potential data, we've got our data, and we've kind of, let's just say it's in a spreadsheet. Where do you go about kind of visualizing that? Because like as a starting approach, it's like you just have lines and lines of data, and ultimately your job then becomes being able to tell a story and visualize that data in the most engaging way. So stakeholders, senior leaders, maybe end users in some instances can make sense of that. Where do you go next?
Oh man, that's a really great question. I think it depends on your audience, right? I mean, if you're talking to CEOs, you're talking to CFOs, you're talking to people who are used to looking at it. You maybe don't have to get it into something super visually appealing right away, or you can get kind of sort of a dashboard kind of idea going and it's really functional for people. But it also depends on I think what you're trying to accomplish with that data too, how much you benefit from kind of wrapping it up into a tight little picture with, trying to get into some visual representation and all of that. Do you have anything that you've landed on being really successful? I try to mostly just, let's get this in a way where we can see data points that match with one another or are kind of comparable, at least where you can see them side by side.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. The dashboard bit is kind of like your foundation levels. Like like have something that people can look at, and as this more data comes in and it changes, people can self-serve it, which is really nice. Rather than going, oh, what's happening with that data, or where is it? What's happening? Is like self-serve with a dashboard is really important because it just make your life a little bit easier, to be completely honest. And also, you as the owner of that dashboard can pop in, have a look, and all that kind of stuff. I think the second thing, yeah, is correlation, right? So is being able to visualize that these two things appear to be having an impact on each other. I think that the other thing I'll raise, just having the benefit of experience, having gone through this process a few times, is that like test it with the audience as well. So, when I was very green to it, it's like, okay, let's just let's show our working, let's show all this information, let's show it in the best way we can, and we designed it and put it in a nice deck, and then a senior leader comes along and kind of interrogates it and like pulls it apart.
Yeah.
It's like, what about this? And what about this? And this? Have you considered this? This number isn't right. And it's like, okay, well, what I'd have much rather done in that situation is probably worked with that stakeholder or someone similar to like critically evaluate where we were going with that report.
Yeah.
And kind of go, well, let's create the story together rather than kind of just sitting in the HR function or the L&D team in this instance and trying to craft that ourselves. It's like, actually, and they're going to appreciate that they're part of that working relation, and that's why working out loud is like so fundamental to the work I do now, because it's just like you kind of have to, otherwise you might feel like you're saving time and energy at that moment, but ultimately you get to the payoff at the end and you go, oh, I wish I'd taken a few steps back before trying to get here as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. The other one that I really value from a few other people I've spoken with is don't give away everything. Keep some of it to yourself. Make sure that you're intentionally, pruning the data like we just talked about. You're not giving them every single thing, but also that, you've got somewhere further to unpack it, or if you're not quite sure where it's leading you yet, you're not putting that in front of other people who might misuse those data points, that you're really protecting the integrity of that data. You're protecting the raw data, and thoughtful about kind of what you're bringing forth to that leadership team.
Yeah, totally. Yes, the kind of the ethics of how broad that data, because I go back to that example of 200 lines of data. If we'd managed to achieve all of those 200 lines and been able to get to like an individual user basis on each of those, is that it'd be quite a powerful but also dangerous tool for someone to use or misuse. And I suppose that's the other thing, is like when you are lucky enough to be in receipt of such data, you're obligated to use it, in the most moral way possible for good, and not use it for bad. And I think there's probably plenty of examples in the world where people do the former and they do it, they do bad stuff with the data. But hey, we're on a HR breakfast. We're on HR Breakfast USA, and by the nature of it being HR, we're kind of all about the moral compass, right? Surely, if any part of the organization is, it's got to be us. Callie, I'm gonna go jump in with a second question. This might be quite a quick one, or might quite a long one. I couldn't decide when I wrote it. You're a kind of you're a chief people officer. You're a people director, head of HR, HRD. Where should data sit on your list of priorities?
Oh, I mean, it's got to be parallel with the top priorities, right? So I feel like data for data's sake doesn't help anyone, right? But any decision that you're making at that level needs to involve data. And maybe that's sort of the fundamental crux of HR and data is we feel like data is sort of this inhumane, I don't know, subhuman sort of way of looking at the world rather than recognizing that it's our superpower for being able to make sure that we're making impactful decisions, that we're headed in the right direction. And so I don't think you can make good C-suite level decisions without data, whether you're the chief financial officer or you're the chief people officer. It has to be there.
I completely agree with you. I think if you were to maybe I should have done this as prep, but I didn't. Like the top 5 priorities for HRDs and chief people officers is like, okay, you could probably see that if one of them is data, that the other 4 probably have a data element to
Yeah.
them in order for them to be successful. And I think it's important to delineate like the kind of different types of data as well, because you
Yes.
can have that kind of quantitative data that is just the numbers and is just the spreadsheets, but there's also that qualitative data which could be drawn out from interviews, focus groups, observations, anecdotal conversations. All those things are still data and still insight and information that, if you're using a human-centered design process, for example, feed into that. So they are just as important. It's just that you can't kind of aggregate them really in any way. But and I go back to the visualization, actually, is that pairing kind of some of the numbers with the
Yeah.
stories like that people have told you, and pulling out parts of interviews and stuff like that can be a really effective tool. Because like you say, I think as HR, I'm going to generalize here, but like it's all about the people, right? So you're more inclined to focus on the stories and the interviews and the focus groups and the data that's coming out of that, rather than the kind of binary data that sits in a spreadsheet. Unfortunately, from my experience, what tends to happen is the rest of the business feels completely the opposite way and loves the numbers but doesn't like the story so much. So it's like, make
Yeah.
sure that data isn't just serving your own needs, but also serving the needs of your audience. And I go back to my previous point, like test it
Yeah.
and see what resonates with your audience the most. Like that's a real small amount of data, a real small test. Just kind of go, which of these do you prefer? Which one of these kind of resonates with you more? And that helps you craft that story. But the original question was priorities, and it's like probably number 1, because the other top 4 in that list of top 5 priorities probably needs data to make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, and I think what you just said parallels really well with my question back to you. Or my second question for you. If you're saying it's sort of a scale of having one end being very quantitative and one end being very qualitative, where do you think the balance lies, or which one should you rely more heavily on? Because I and kind of background being what you said of, we sort of tend to get into the more anecdotal side, and these are the statements and how we've applied that, versus the other side of the business being much more on the numbers side. So where do you think is a good balance for HR to have, kind of balancing the quantitative and the qualitative?
Wow. I have never thought of that. So now I'm going to and react live on the internet for all to see.
You're welcome.
Stumped. I don't want to sit on the fence, but I think I'm going to. No, I'm not. No, let's make a definitive statement rather than just going, well, both are equally. I think your quantitative data is more important. For the reasons I just said before. I think that the quantitative data is going to resonate more with the people in the business. So I think you kind of have to prioritize that. And I think the thing that always comes back with quantitative data is, as well, as like your sample size. Stakeholders always come back to the sample size. Tell me the sample size. How many people did you talk to? But the other thing, I suppose, is making sure it's the right qualitative data as well, because in some research projects that I've seen carried out, they kind of say, oh, we're going to fix this. What's wrong with it? And therefore, you kind of just get all the negative stuff, and it's kind of weighted towards finding a problem already, rather than
Yeah.
going in with kind of like open honesty and say, okay, is there even a problem? And
Right.
I think that's really important. So those two things that kind of always come back with quantitative data is that is the volume, and how did you go about getting that? Because if you said, we've noticed our induction isn't very good, what was the worst part of your induction? Of course, everyone's going to come back with negative stuff, but there's different and better ways of finding those pain points. The qualitative stuff is really important, but like I say, it supports those stories. And I think if your HR team is doing a good enough job of understanding the end user, the employees, and having enough conversations with them, then that should just employee is one general mass. Those anecdotal conversations should be in the head already. And sorry, I am rabbiting on, but there is. I was working in an L&D team where I think the average tenure went into double digits. And naturally, because they'd done the job that the employees that they were serving had done, and they'd been there for quite a while, the anecdotes and the conversations with colleagues they had was vast. Like, they could pull examples out of their head, lickety split, just like that.
Sure.
Now that was really powerful, and so for the thing that would have made them even better was having huge amounts of quantitative data, I guess, which they didn't have. But also, this is a difficult one, right? It's such a difficult, because it's all like in that example as well, it's like you have no idea how recent those examples were. So it's like, if they'd been in the company double digits, they said they've been there 10 years, you could be going, oh, but people on our front line do X, Y, and Z. And that could be like from something you witnessed a week ago or 10 years ago, which isn't probably particularly relevant. So
Right.
uh, the thing that quantitative data helps you with, I guess, is that ability to understand it in that moment in time, but also understand the movement in that moment in time as well, which is really nice. Whereas if you have a conversation with someone, you're kind of only measuring it in that one moment of time, and then maybe you might measure it again. You might have a conversation with them, but then that's an incredibly manual process. So, did I answer the question? I'm going to say get more numbers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the other thing that I wanted to make sure we got a chance to talk about in this conversation was the importance of recognizing that even if you had a great conversation, even if you felt like they were being 100% honest with you, they're not being 100% honest with you. And
Yeah.
that by melding the quantitative and the qualitative, you can get a little bit closer to the absolute truth. My favorite one to talk about is, finances are a really hard thing for people to talk about in the US, especially. And there's a lot going on right now. People are really stressed out. And if you come into a conversation and say, what types of tools do you wish that we were providing you? I mean, the person who's struggling is probably also saying, oh, no, I'm fine. I don't need any more tools. Well, really not even understanding what sorts of tools there could be out there. So I guess more of a statement in general about being able to dive deeper in ways that look at behavior, not just attitude or not just what someone is willing to verbalize, is so important when we start to get to that next layer of where can the data take us.
Yeah, totally. I think we got a question. Did you
Yay,
get this is our
Teresa.
first time using Restream? So it's like, oh, we get questions now. This is cool. What are your thoughts on the new skills HR will need when using data? Do you want to go first, or shall I?
I mean, if you have a thought on where to start, I'd like a second to think since I was talking, but I'm also I can go if I need to.
The really cool thing is, in that little monologue about you making your decision, I made my decision. You gave me some time. New skills HR will need. So the easy answer is go hire a data scientist. But that's kind of like, you got to hire someone and understand how they work, collaborate together, all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So that's like the get out, make it nice and easy, like make it somebody else's problem. But
Yeah.
as with anything, and this goes to the same with developers as well that I've worked with, is that and even people who media producers, that kind of stuff, is you have to be able to have a good working knowledge of what they're trying to achieve, to have a meaningful conversation with them about the work they're trying to do, for you then to help them the best. So hiring a data scientist is like, that's quite an easy answer. But then essentially what you need to do is, with having that person in your team, is be able to have a reasonable conversation with them about their work. So you have to become 25%, 20%, I don't know the exact maths, of a data scientist to make that work. The other thing I would say is that it's kind of just building it into the routine of everything you do. So if we look at the principles of customer success teams and product design teams and how they share data and insight, I'm going to have to come back because my business partner's just messaged me and I've got to read it out. Yes, she has completely thrown me. She's just told me don't hire a data scientist. I think she thinks I'm really intelligent or on do not disturb, but I'm not. So yeah, don't hire a data scientist. And I'm sure Emily will put very eloquently in the comments why you shouldn't hire a data scientist. But I think it goes back to that point, right? And probably what she's trying to reinforce is that it isn't just about knocking that problem onto someone else. It kind of has to be everybody's responsibility, because if it is just that one person, let's say it's that one person who's looking after data in a team of 10, the other 9 people have no idea, that one person's got no hope because they haven't got the support, the context, and the understanding of their team to enable an effective data strategy to happen in their organization. Callie, I'm going to throw it over to you whilst I try and remember the other point I was going to make.
Yeah. Well, so I keep thinking more about like sort of mindset. And I think being curious and being scrappy are really important. Don't just think about what are the canned things that you have access to. Where else can you get data? So like benefit brokers have a ton of data they don't necessarily offer to us about the utilization of employees with the different benefits that we have, right? Like just utilization itself is a good number that can help us kind of understand things better, but also what are they actually utilizing? And then being able to say, I need to dig deeper into this. What else do I have available that I can really start to cross those things? I also think if you don't come from a background where you've had insight into how like experimental design or statistics, starting to get curious about understanding those processes is really, really important. I have a psych degree. It was really easy for me to start thinking about how do you actually design a good study or how do you look at data in a meaningful way, because I got used to doing that in college. And so if you haven't had that opportunity, I think just starting to understand what is good data, what is bad data is really, really important for getting started.
Yeah. And I think it's like there's learning to be had from other people in your organization, right? So like you say, there are sales, marketing, customer success teams, anybody who kind of builds a product or kind of has that skill set probably in the organization already. So go and find out how your customer facing teams are working with data and bring some of that over to your side, because they'll have been on this road already, because most customer facing teams, because it's the money making part of the organization, is like, how do we make these decisions faster and smarter than we have done before? So bring them in and try and learn from them. You may also find that they have technology and platforms that you can utilize as well, which is really cool. And I think, CRMs, having used CRMs for quite a few years now, and like, there's so much insight I can get out of a CRM. And then I sit in a HR team and try and get that same level of insight. It's like, I forget that, I'm not using, I'm name drop here, I'm not using HubSpot for all my employee data. That's just for the customer stuff. All my employee data is somewhere else.
Aren't you also kind of surprised that HubSpot hasn't just made an employee data section?
I had this conversation at lunchtime today. I was like, and it's one I've had for the past 6 months. It's like, where is HubSpot for employees? HubSpot, if you want to sponsor this and take this idea, that's fine. But it was here first, and it'll cost probably 7 figures to buy that offers.
At least,
yeah. We'll negotiate off off camera for sure. Michael's also commented, as a benefit broker, benchmarking and data insight have become my most valuable resources. I have worked with a benefit broker quite recently and looked at all their data and insight, and I was like, finally, someone who's
Right.
doing it right. Like, because you live or but again, it's because it's a product for a customer, so you're going to live or die by the success of that product. So you need that insight to make the product better, so the customers use it and use it more. So again, it's that product thinking that really gets you to a different place with data.
Absolutely.
Emily is now messaging saying, yeah, she thought I was on Do Not Disturb. Yeah, silly me.
We are now 1
what
minute over what I said we would end at. So I want to make sure that we respect the timelines here. But this has been so much fun. Sam will be back with us next week with a to be determined topic. Please stay tuned. Anything else you want to add, Toby?
No, that's a real cliffhanger, isn't it? It's like the next episode is going to be who knows. We've got like a list of topics, and we just pick our favorite one. So we'll let you know very shortly. But yeah, this has been a blast as always. Thank you, Callie.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.